I remember the day the letter arrived like it was yesterday. It was just another Monday. Work had been stressful, the drive home had been long, and all I wanted was to kick back with a beer and catch up on some sports. But as soon as I opened my mailbox and saw that crisp white envelope from a collection agency, my stomach sank. I wasn't in debt. At least I shouldn't have been. I tore open the envelope, my fingers trembling as I scanned the words. Past due balance. $6,000. My head spun. This had to be a mistake. I never opened any new accounts, and I certainly didn't rack up thousands in debt. But as I read further, a familiar address caught my eye. Her address, my ex-wife's. A sick realization settled in my gut. She had done this. I slammed the letter down, my pulse hammering. It had been 4 years since our divorce. 4 years of biting my tongue, keeping the peace for the sake of our son, and sticking to our custody agreement, even when she made it as difficult as possible. But this was outright fraud. I grabbed my phone and called the number listed on the letter. After 30 minutes of being bounced around from one robotic voice to another, I finally got a real person on the line. Sir, the charges on these cards appear to be from retail stores and online purchases. Are you sure you didn't authorize them? The agent asked, her tone neutral. I gritted my teeth. No, I didn't authorize them. I never even opened those cards. Well, the billing address matches one previously associated with you. Have you checked with your ex-spouse? I almost laughed. Of course they suspected her too. It was too obvious. By the time I hung up, my head was pounding. There were 2 options here: let this slide and take the financial hit, or report her. And I already knew what had to be done. But before I did anything, I needed to confront her. That night, I drove the 30 miles to my ex-wife's house, where she still lived with our son. I had moved out of the district after the divorce, but I always made the drive to pick him up for our weekends together. It was routine, but this time, I wasn't here for that. I knocked on the door, the collection letter clenched in my fist. When she opened it, she looked surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, crossing her arms. I didn't waste time. I held up the letter. "You want to tell me why I'm getting collection notices for credit cards I never opened?" Her expression shifted instantly, a flash of guilt quickly buried under indifference. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Bullshit," I snapped. "The billing address is yours. The purchases match your stores. Just admit it." Her jaw tightened. "Even if I did use your name, it's not a big deal. I was going to pay it off." $6,000 isn't a big deal to you?" My voice rose. "You stole my identity." She rolled her eyes like I was the one being unreasonable. "It's not like you don't have money. You make more than I do, and I needed some help. I was going to handle it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's not how this works. You committed fraud. Do you understand how serious this is?" That's when she dropped the bombshell. "If you go to the cops, I'll make sure you don't see our son," she said, her voice sharp and cold. My blood ran cold. "What?" I whispered. "You heard me," she said, tilting her chin up. "I'll tell the court that you're unstable, that I don't feel safe letting our son be alone with you. And since I have primary custody, good luck fighting it." I stared at her, feeling a mix of rage and disbelief. I'd seen her manipulate situations before, but this was a new low. "You can't do that," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. She smirked. "I already have. Remember when I kept him from you for 3 weeks? You had to take me to court, and sure, you won. But how long did it take? How much money did you waste on a lawyer? Do you really want to go through that again?" She was right. The last time she pulled this, it had taken months of legal battles to enforce my visitation rights. The courts had eventually sided with me, but not before I had spent thousands on attorney fees. And our son? He had suffered the most, caught between his mother's lies and the frustration of not seeing me. I clenched my fists. "You're blackmailing me," she shrugged. "Call it whatever you want. I call it protecting myself." There was a long silence between us. I could feel my heart pounding, my breath uneven. I couldn't let her get away with this. But I also couldn't risk losing my son. Finally, I spoke. "I'll give you one chance," I said, my voice firm. "Pay off the debt, every cent. And if I get one more collection notice, I go straight to the police. I don't care what you threaten." She looked at me, trying to gauge whether I was bluffing. "And if I do pay it off?" she asked. Then this stays between us, I said, through gritted teeth. But if you ever pull something like this again, I swear to God I will bury you in legal action. Her eyes narrowed. She knew I meant it. Without another word, I turned and walked away, my pulse still racing. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. What if she doesn't pay it off? And worse, what if she follows through on her threat to take away my visitation rights? I needed a plan, and fast, because this time I wasn't letting her win. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying our conversation, the smug look on her face, the way she so easily wielded our son like a weapon. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. She had gotten away, with too much already, ignoring custody agreements, pulling strings to make my life harder, and now outright fraud. And the worst part? She didn't even fear consequences. She thought I would roll over because of my son. I couldn't let that happen. 2 days later, I called the credit card company to check on the accounts. I had given her a deadline to start making payments, but something told me she wouldn't, and I was right. Sir, no payments have been made, the rep informed me. In fact, the balance has increased due to interest and late fees. I nearly crushed my phone in my grip. How much now? I forced out. $6,527, she said. Would you like to make a payment today? I hung up without answering. She hadn't even tried to fix it. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't let this slide. The next day, I took an early lunch from work and went straight to my attorney's office. James Carter had been my lawyer during the divorce, and he knew exactly what kind of person my ex was. As soon as I laid out the situation, he leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. Let me get this straight, he said. She committed identity theft, racked up $6,000 in debt under your name, and now she's threatening to withhold your son if you report her. Exactly. He shook his head. She's playing a dangerous game. I leaned forward. What are my options? He sighed. You can report her, and honestly, you should. But the problem is that custody and criminal cases don't always overlap cleanly. If she files for a custody modification and claims you're unstable, it could delay or complicate things. Judges hate messy battles. I clenched my fists. So what? Do I do? Just let her get away with it? James gave me a hard look. No. But we have to be smart. If we hit her with legal action before she can pull her custody stunt, we keep the upper hand. I say we file a fraud report with the police and a motion with family court to prevent her from interfering with your custody agreement again. That way, we're ahead of her moves. It was risky, but I was done playing her games. Do it, I said. That evening, I drove to the police station. Filing a fraud report against the mother of my child wasn't something I ever thought I'd have to do. But there I was, sitting across from an officer, handing over the evidence. The what? Statements, the collection notices, the proof that the cards had been opened at her address. The officer, a grizzled-looking guy with a thick mustache, studied the documents and nodded. This is pretty clear-cut identity theft, he said. She could be facing felony charges depending on how the DA sees it. Felony. The weight of that word hit me hard. I knew she deserved to face consequences, but the idea of my son's mother going to jail, it didn't sit right. Still, she had done this to herself. The officer looked up at me. Do you want to press charges? I swallowed hard. This was the point of no return. Yes, I said. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number, I answered. And the second I heard her voice, I knew she had found out. Are you insane? She shrieked. You actually filed a police report on me? I stayed calm. You gave me no choice. You could have just let me pay it off, I scoffed. You weren't paying it off. You were making it worse. There was a brief silence. Then her voice dropped to something venomous. You will regret this. I clenched my jaw. No, you will. Then I hung up. I knew what was coming next. She was going to try and take my son from me, but this time, I was ready. She follows through on her threat, and suddenly, I'm facing an emergency custody battle. With my visitation rights hanging, by a thread, I have to prove that she's manipulating the system before it's too late. I barely had time to process the weight of what I'd done before the fallout hit. 2 days after I filed the police report, I showed up at my ex's house to pick up my son for the weekend. The routine was always the same. I'd pull up, he'd come running out with his overnight bag, and we'd be off. But this time, something was wrong. She was waiting for me on the porch, arms crossed, a smug little smirk playing at her lips. My stomach tightened. Where was my son? I got out of the car, keeping my voice calm. "Where is he?" Her expression didn't change. "He's not going with you." A cold wave of rage and panic crashed over me. "What are you talking about?" She shrugged. "I don't feel safe sending him with you. Not after what you did." I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay controlled. "You don't get to make that decision. We have a custody agreement." She tilted her head. "Oh, do we?" "Because I just filed for an emergency custody modification." I froze. She actually did it. "You lied to the court?" I said, my voice low. She just smiled. "You pushed me into this. You should have left well enough alone. But no. You just had to call the cops on me. So now, we'll let the judge decide who's really fit to be a parent." I clenched my fists. "You're insane!" Her smirk widened. "We'll see." Then she turned and walked back inside, closing the door in my face. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding in my ears. Then I got in my car and called my lawyer. By Monday, I was sitting in a family court hearing, watching my ex-wife put on the performance of a lifetime. "He's unstable," she told the judge, her voice thick with fake concern. "He filed criminal charges against me, and I truly don't feel safe letting our son be around him right now." I gritted my teeth. Unbelievable. The judge, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, looked at my attorney. "Mr. Carter, does your client have a response?" James stood. "Yes, Your Honor. My client filed a police report because the mother of his child committed identity theft against him, which we can prove. This was not a case of emotional retaliation. It was a legal necessity. And to be clear, my client has never displayed instability or put his son in harm's way. This is a blatant attempt at parental alienation." The judge studied both of us, then flipped through the paperwork. There was a long silence. Then he spoke. "Ms. Walker," he said, addressing my ex, "I see no legitimate reason to modify custody at this time. Your concerns appear retaliatory rather than founded in any genuine danger to the child." My ex's face paled. The judge continued. "Until further evidence is presented, the standing custody agreement remains in effect. That means Mr. Parker retains his scheduled visitation." Relief flooded through me. She lost, for now. But as I glanced at my ex, I knew she wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The next weekend, I arrived to pick up my son. This time, she didn't try to stop me, probably because she knew I'd bring the police if she pulled that stunt again, but something was off. My son, usually full of energy, looked quiet, nervous. He barely spoke as he climbed into the car. It wasn't until we were halfway home that he finally whispered, "Mom said you're trying to send her to jail." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Of course, she was poisoning him against me. I forced my voice to stay gentle. "Bud, I would never do anything to hurt you or your mom, but she did something that wasn't right, and adults have to be responsible for their actions." He didn't respond. He just stared out the window, and my heart broke. She was turning my own son against me. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was war. With my son caught in the middle, I have to find a way to protect him from his mother's manipulation. Before, she succeeds in making him believe I'm the enemy. But then, I get a call that changes everything. The entire drive home, my son barely said a word. Normally, our weekends together were full of laughter, movie marathons, and junk food. But this time, it felt like there was a wall between us, and I knew exactly who had built it. By the time we got back to my house, I decided to confront it head on. "Hey, bud," I said, kneeling in front of him. "I know your mom has been telling you things about me, and I just want you to know. You can always ask me if you have questions. I'll never lie to you." He hesitated, shifting on his feet. "She said you want to send her away forever," I sighed. "I don't want that. But she did something that wasn't fair to me, and I had to do the right thing." He looked up at me, his small face serious. "Are you mad at her?" I hesitated. "I'm disappointed, but no matter what happens, I love you." That will never change. He nodded slowly, and for the first time that day, I saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. That night, just as I was tucking my son into bed, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I stepped into the hallway and answered. "Hello?" A woman's voice came through the line. "Mr. Parker, my name is Lisa Carter. I work in fraud investigations at the bank. I need to talk to you about the case you reported." My stomach tightened. "Okay, what's going on?" She hesitated. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this yet, but your ex-wife didn't just open 2 credit cards in your name. We found a third one, and it's worse than the others." I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. "How bad?" "The balance is over $10,000, and it looks like she applied for a personal loan under your name, too." My head spun. This wasn't just $6,000 in stolen money anymore. This was financial destruction. Lisa continued. "If she gets caught, she's looking at serious charges. Identity theft, fraud, possibly even wire fraud if she did any of this online." I gripped the edge of the hallway table to steady myself. "And you're sure it was her?" The IP address for the online applications traces back to her home. We also have store security footage showing her using the cards. That was it. Game over. I swallowed hard. "What happens now?" "The bank will proceed with the case. It's out of your hands now. The police will likely issue a warrant soon. A warrant for the mother of my child." I exhaled shakily. "Okay, thank you for letting me know." As I hung up, my mind raced. This wasn't just about her manipulating me anymore. She had dug herself into a hole so deep I wasn't sure she'd ever climb out of it. And the worst part, my son was about to get caught in the middle of the fallout. Next morning, as I was making breakfast, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my ex-wife standing there, wild-eyed and furious. "You snitched again?" she hissed, stepping inside without invitation. I crossed my arms. "I didn't do anything. The bank found more fraud, and now it's out of my hands." She let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, don't play innocent. You want me to go to jail. That's what this is about, right? Punishing me?" I shook my head. "No, this is about you stealing thousands of dollars and thinking there'd be no consequences." She stepped closer, her eyes dark. "If I go down, I'll make sure you lose everything." I narrowed my eyes. "What does that mean?" She smiled, and it sent a chill down my spine. "Let's just say, I have one last card to play." Then she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, heart pounding. What the hell was she planning? Just when I think I've seen the worst of her manipulations, she pulls her final, most dangerous move yet. And this time, she's not just coming for my money, she's coming for my freedom. I knew she was planning something. The way she had smirked before walking away sent every alarm in my body blaring, but I had no idea just how far she was about to go. The next morning, I was getting ready to drop my son back off at her house, when I got the call, not from my lawyer, not from the bank, from the police. "Mr. Parker?" a stern male voice asked. "This is Officer Delgado from the County Sheriff's Department. We need you to come down to the station for questioning." My blood turned to ice. "What's this about?" There was a pause. "We've received a complaint against you. Your ex-wife has accused you of domestic violence and child endangerment." For a second, I couldn't even breathe. Then reality came crashing. Down. She did it. She played the dirtiest card she had. I forced myself to stay calm. "That's a lie. A complete lie." "Then you'll have no problem coming in to answer some questions," Delgado said. His tone wasn't hostile, but it was firm. This was real. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I'll be there." As I hung up, my hands were shaking. This wasn't just about fraud anymore. She was trying to take everything from me. My reputation, my freedom, my son, and if I didn't handle this carefully, she just might succeed. I drove to the station in a daze, my lawyer already on the way. When I got there, Officer Delgado led me to a small, windowless room. There was a folder on the table. My name was written on it. He sat across from me, studying me like a hawk. "Your ex-wife claims you were physically aggressive toward her during your last exchange. She also claims you've been verbally abusive toward your son." I clenched my jaw. "That is an absolute lie. I would never lay a hand on her or my kid." Delgado nodded, flipping open the folder. She provided photos of a bruise on her wrist saying you grabbed her. I laughed coldly. That's ridiculous. The last time I saw her, she barged into my house and left just fine. And your son? Delgado pressed. I swallowed hard. She's poisoning him against me. She's been feeding him lies, but I have never mistreated him. Ever. Before he could respond, my lawyer, James, finally arrived. He sat down beside me, glancing at the folder. Officer, do you have any actual evidence besides her word? Delgado sighed, closing the folder. Right now, it's just her statement and the photos she provided. But given the ongoing custody case and financial disputes, we are taking motive into account. Relief surged through me. She had underestimated the system. This wasn't just a he said she said situation. She had a criminal fraud case looming over her. That meant her credibility was already shaky. James leaned forward. I strongly advise you to be cautious with this. False accusations of abuse are serious, and if we can prove she's lying, she could be charged with filing a false report. Delgado nodded. We'll conduct a full investigation. In the meantime, Mr. Parker, avoid all contact with your ex-wife. Keep communication about your son limited and documented. I exhaled. Trust me, that won't be a problem. As I walked out of that station, one thing became crystal clear. She wasn't just desperate. She was dangerous, and I needed to end this once and for all. That night, I called my lawyer with a new plan. I want full custody, I said. James exhaled. I was hoping you'd say that. It's time we stop playing defense and go on the offensive. We had everything we needed. A false police report, identity theft, financial fraud. She thought she could destroy me, but she was about to destroy herself. And the worst part? She didn't even see it coming. The final custody battle begins, but just when I think I've won, my ex pulls one last desperate act that shocks everyone in the courtroom. Will I finally be free from her manipulation, or will she find a way to take me down with her? The day of the custody hearing arrived faster than I expected. I sat in the courtroom, my lawyer at my side, my hands gripping the table so tightly my knuckles were white. This was it. My ex was about to face the consequences of everything she had done, and I was about to find out if I would finally be free from her grip. She walked in looking confident, like she actually believed she still had control over the situation. I had to give her credit. She was committed to the act. She even had a bandage on her wrist, probably trying to milk her fake injury for sympathy. Her lawyer stood up first. Your Honor, my client is deeply concerned for the well-being of her child. Given the domestic violence claims, as well as the emotional distress inflicted on both her and their son, we believe it is in the child's best interest to remain solely in the custody of his mother. I held back a bitter laugh. They were still running with that? Even after the police didn't arrest me? Then James stood up. Your Honor, the mother in this case has a history of lying and manipulation. We have evidence that she committed identity, theft, financial fraud, and perjury, all of which put her credibility into question. Additionally, the so-called domestic violence claim was proven to be a false accusation, something the responding officers noted in their report. James turned to the judge, his voice calm but firm. Your Honor, my client isn't the danger here. She is. And the longer she has primary custody, the more damage she will do, not just to my client, but to their son. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. For the first time, my ex-wife's smirk disappeared. She knew she was losing. Then, in an act so insane I almost couldn't believe it, my ex stood up in the middle of the hearing and started screaming. "This is a setup!" she shrieked. "He's trying to ruin my life. He forced me to use those credit cards. He manipulated me into taking out the loan." The judge banged his gavel. "Ms. Walker, sit down immediately." She ignored him. "He's lying. I swear, I'm the victim here. He should be in jail." The courtroom was dead silent. Then my lawyer leaned over and whispered, "She just buried herself." And he was right, because the judge looked her straight in the eye and said, "Ms. Walker, given your outburst and the overwhelming evidence against you, I am granting full custody to Mr. Parker." Her face went completely blank. It was over. After. "Court, she tried to talk to me in the hallway. Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You can't take him from me." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I saw her for what she truly was. Pathetic. A liar. A woman so consumed by her need for control that she had destroyed herself in the process. "You did this to yourself," I said coldly. Then, I walked away. A week later, the police officially charged her with fraud. She was facing serious time. And me? I was free. Free to raise my son without fear, free to live my life without looking over my shoulder, free from the woman who had spent years trying to ruin me, and for the first time in a long, long time, I could finally breathe again. Some people think they can get away with anything, that their lies will always protect them, that they'll never face consequences. But the truth, karma always comes. And when it does, it hits hard. That's the end of today's story. Did things turn out the way you thought, or were there some surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't joined the community yet, now's the perfect time. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch new stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.